For decades, scientists dismissed it as a myth. Local tribes insisted it was real, massive, aggressive, and terrifying. Now, new evidence suggests the legendary Jaa-ba-fofi spider may be far worse than the stories ever claimed. Join us and let's uncover the truth behind the giant Congo spider that defies belief. Let's go.
Number 9. 1920s colonial zoologist canopy vibrations, unidentified movement reports. A zoologist working in Congo during the 1920s kept detailed field notes about everything he observed during his research trips. One recurring detail kept showing up in his journals that he could never explain. While moving through certain sections of forest, he consistently felt heavy vibrations coming from the canopy above his head. The vibrations were strong enough to shake leaves loose and cause small branches to sway noticeably. His first thought was primates, since gorillas and chimpanzees were known to travel through trees in that region, but the pattern was wrong. Primates move with recognizable rhythms and speeds that anyone who spent time in the jungle could identify. These vibrations were slower, heavier, and way more deliberate. They suggested something with serious body mass moving carefully rather than quickly through the upper canopy. He documented the phenomenon across multiple locations, noting that vibrations always occurred in areas where the canopy was particularly dense and the undergrowth was unusually quiet. He spent hours watching the trees with binoculars, trying to catch sight of whatever was up there. He never saw it. Whatever was moving through those trees stayed hidden in thick foliage and only revealed its presence through the physical disturbance it created. His notes were filed in academic archives and ignored. Other researchers assumed he had misidentified primate movement or misjudged natural wind patterns affecting the canopy. But he remained convinced until his death that something massive and completely unidentified was living in those trees. Recent analysis of his journals revealed something interesting. The vibration patterns he described matched the movement frequency of something weighing between 80 and 150 pounds, traveling through branches designed to support much lighter animals.
Number 8. Congo River Basin Silk Trade Stories, Ancient Spider Silk Legends. Long before European colonization, indigenous tribes throughout the Congo River Basin had established trade networks that moved goods across thousands of miles. Among the most valued trade items was a specific type of silk that tribes claimed came from giant spiders living deep in restricted forest areas. Arab traders who visited the region in the 15th and 16th centuries documented these silk trade stories in travel journals. The silk was described as exceptionally strong, resistant to water, and capable of holding weight that would snap normal fabric. Tribal traders claimed the silk came from creatures called the night weavers that build webs in areas where humans were forbidden to enter. The silk was collected by designated hunters who followed specific protocols to avoid attracting the spider's attention. These hunters worked only during daylight hours, moved in complete silence, and took only small amounts from the outer edges of web structures. The collected silk was used for fishing nets, hunting snares, and ceremonial garments for tribal leaders. European explorers in the 19th century dismissed these stories as exaggerations designed to increase the silk's trade value. However, samples of the silk were occasionally sent back to Europe for analysis. A British textile expert in 1883 examined silk samples from the Congo and noted in his report that the fibers showed unusual protein structures inconsistent with known silk-producing insects. He concluded the material came from an unidentified source but offered no explanation for what that source might be. The silk trade largely disappeared during the colonial period as European goods replaced traditional trade items. Modern attempts to locate sources of the ancient spider silk have failed, partly because the tribes who originally collected it refused to share the locations of the websites.
I'm going to ask you a simple question. Are you a naturally curious person? If you're watching, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. This space is made for people like us. To ensure you're always part of this community and receive all our latest discoveries, you just need to do one thing: subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to stay connected with us. Okay, now that you're part of our Legion of the Curious, let's move on to the next item.
Number 7. Night of White Bones Legend, Congo Skeleton Feeding Ground Site. Tribal elders hesitate to discuss one story because they believe it shows exactly what the Jaa-ba-fofi is capable of. They call it the Night of the White Bones. It describes a hunting party that accidentally entered a clearing deep inside restricted territory. The hunters realized immediately they had stepped into the spider's feeding ground. Dozens of skeletons hung from trees in various completion stages. Some were fully wrapped in thick silk cocoons. Others were only partially covered, revealing bones picked completely clean. The silk matched the heavy white threads tribes associate with the giant spider, and the sheer number of bodies indicated the clearing had been used as a feeding site for extended periods. What terrified the hunters most wasn't the quantity of dead, it was the condition of the remains. Some bodies still had flesh pieces attached, meaning the spider had fed recently and would likely return soon. The bones themselves were arranged in patterns suggesting deliberate placement rather than random disposal. Several skulls were positioned in a rough circle. Long bones were stacked in parallel lines. Whether this arrangement was intentional or simply resulted from the spider's feeding process remains unknown, but hunters interpreted it as evidence of intelligence beyond basic animal behavior. They fled without taking anything and reported the location to village elders. The entire community now treats that clearing as absolutely forbidden. Nobody has entered since. Anyone asking for directions gets refused. The clearing's location remains secret, passed only between elders during specific ceremonies. Some researchers believe the site still exists, maintained by the spider as a permanent feeding ground where it returns regularly to deposit new kills and feed on partially preserved remains.
Number 6. Baka tribe silk-wrapped monkey discoveries, enzyme feeding evidence. The Baka people have tracked animals through Congo forests for thousands of years. They know what natural death looks like, what disease does to a body, and how different predators leave different evidence. So when they started finding dead monkeys in certain areas, they knew immediately something was off. The monkeys had no wounds, no signs of illness, and no obvious cause of death. They just looked like they had dropped dead mid-movement. But when Baka hunters examined the bodies closely, they found something disturbing. Each corpse was wrapped in extremely thin silk layers that were almost invisible unless you touched them directly. The wrapping was so delicate, it looked like the monkeys had simply died naturally, but once you felt the silk coating, there was no mistaking what had happened. The condition of the bodies was even worse. The monkeys had been drained. Internal fluids were missing, and the flesh had this dried, compressed look that suggested something had been feeding on them slowly over days or even weeks. Baka hunters had seen every type of predator kill in that forest. They knew leopard attacks, python constrictions, and how decomposition worked in tropical heat. This was completely different. The bodies hadn't been torn apart or consumed in any normal predator pattern. They had been prepared, preserved, and fed upon using a method that didn't exist in any other animal behavior they recognized. What made it worse was the enzyme evidence. When researchers finally tested the silk residue years later, they found digestive compounds that started breaking down tissue on contact. The spider wasn't just killing prey and eating it. The feeding process began the moment prey touched the silk, dissolving them slowly while they were still alive. Number 5. Traditional spider offerings ritual, Baka survival food placement. Villagers leave small portions of meat or fruit beneath specific trees throughout the forest. These offerings aren't religious ceremonies. They're not meant to honor spirits or appease supernatural forces. The tribes are very clear about this. The offerings are practical survival measures designed to make human presence less threatening to the spider. Elders explain that generations ago, before this practice started, disappearances happened way more frequently in certain areas. After tribes began leaving regular offerings, the attack rate dropped noticeably. Whether this proves causation is still debated among the tribes themselves, but the practice continues because the results have been consistent enough. The offerings get placed in locations where the spider is known to hunt, specifically along territory edges, where human paths cross areas showing web construction signs. Tribes believe this signals to the creature that humans acknowledge its presence and aren't competing for the same prey. Some elders think the offerings provide easy meals that reduce the spider's need to actively hunt larger prey like humans. Others believe the practice simply establishes a boundary both species respect. Whatever the exact mechanism, the tradition remains unbroken because stopping it has historically led to immediate increases in attacks and disappearances. The offerings follow specific rules. Meat must be fresh, placed before dawn, and left at the base of trees showing claw marks or silk residue. Fruit offerings require specific types. Mangoes, papayas, and wild figs are acceptable. Citrus fruits are avoided because tribes believe the spider dislikes acidic scents.
Anthropologists studying the practice noted that villages maintaining regular offerings report significantly fewer disappearances compared to communities that abandoned the tradition after missionary influence discouraged it.
Number 4. The 1938 Atori Forest Missionary Incident. Robert Hale survivor account. Colonial missionaries in 1938 thought they had seen everything the Congo could throw at them. Malaria, poisonous snakes, aggressive wildlife, but nothing prepared them for what they found stretched across a narrow trail in the Atori forest. The web looked wrong from the start. The threads were thick like climbing rope, white as bone, and when anyone got within 10 feet, the whole structure vibrated hard enough to feel through your boots. These weren't amateur explorers who spooked easily. They had dealt with tropical diseases that could drop you in 3 days and predators that could smell blood from a mile away. This web was different, though. The silk was too strong, too deliberately constructed, and way too large to match anything in their field guides. That night, 3 people vanished. Not wandered off, not got lost. Vanished. Their gear stayed behind, their tents were untouched, and their footprints just stopped like someone had erased them from existence. Robert Hale was the only one who survived to tell what happened. When colonial officers found him 2 days later, he couldn't string together a full sentence. He kept saying the same thing over and over. Something with multiple arms had dropped down from the trees and taken his friends. The officers wrote it off as malaria hallucinations and filed the report under medical delusions. But here's what they don't tell you. Those same officers collected samples of the silk. They measured the tensile strength, documented the protein composition, and recorded observations that didn't match any known spider species in Africa or anywhere else. Then they sealed everything in storage and never opened the investigation again. The samples still exist in an archive somewhere, labeled as unidentified biological material. That's not the behavior of people who thought it was just fever dreams.
Number 3. Belgian Congo military quarantine, 1940s. Soldier paralysis case. Early 1940s. A Congolese soldier working with Belgian forces stumbled into his military outpost looking like he had been through hell. His uniform was covered in thick white fibers that medical staff had never seen before. When they tried to examine him, they discovered something that made zero sense. His legs were completely paralyzed but showed no signs of injury. No broken bones, no damaged nerves, no physical trauma whatsoever. Blood tests came back showing venom in his system, but the toxin didn't match anything in their military medical database. The paralysis wasn't structural. Something had injected him with a compound that shut down his motor functions while keeping him fully awake and aware. He could see, hear, and feel everything, but his body refused to respond to any commands from his brain. The venom kept him like that for several hours before it gradually wore off. Belgian command responded by sealing off a massive area around the attack site for 6 straight months. They didn't warn local populations about dangerous wildlife. They didn't send research teams to study what attacked their soldier. They just blocked access and waited. When the quarantine finally ended, officials refused to answer any questions about what they found or why the closure had been necessary in the first place. Local hunters reported seeing military patrols moving through the restricted zone at night with specialized equipment, but nobody ever confirmed what they were searching for. The military destroyed most of the documentation related to that incident. What survived suggests they found something they couldn't explain and decided the safest option was to pretend it never happened.
Number 2. Congo Village Child Disappearance. Giant Spider Footprint Analysis. A child wandered away from a village near the forest edge and never came back. Search parties formed immediately because everyone knew the jungle could kill in dozens of ways within minutes. They found torn clothing beside a depression in the mud that looked like a footprint, but the shape was completely wrong. The print was wider than any human foot, deeper than gorilla tracks, and showed a pattern suggesting multiple contact points rather than one solid surface. The clothing had been ripped with enough force to shred the fabric completely, and the surrounding vegetation showed clear signs of struggle. Broken branches, disturbed soil, and drag marks led away from the site before disappearing into dense undergrowth about 30 meters later. The search party followed as far as they could, but the trail just vanished. No body was recovered, no additional evidence emerged, and no physical clues explained what had taken the child. Village elders made the decision right there to abandon several nearby hunting paths and warned other communities to stay away from that entire section of forest. Western researchers who heard about it later classified the incident as a probable leopard attack, despite the fact that the footprint pattern matched no known feline species, and the abduction method was nothing like how big cats hunt. The villagers rejected that explanation immediately because they had lived alongside leopards their entire lives and knew exactly what their tracks looked like. This wasn't one. The footprint measurements were later documented by an anthropologist studying the region. The impression measured roughly 18 inches across, with what appeared to be 8 distinct pressure points arranged in a circular pattern. No known animal in Central Africa leaves tracks like that.
Number 1. Modern Satellite Thermal Imaging 2018. Unexplained Heat Signatures, Congo. In 2018, conservation organizations using satellite thermal imaging to monitor wildlife populations in Congo rainforests detected anomalous heat signatures that didn't match any known animal patterns. The signatures appeared in remote forest regions rarely visited by humans and showed characteristics that raised immediate questions. Unlike typical large mammal heat signatures that show a single concentrated heat source corresponding to body core temperature, these signatures showed distributed heat patterns spanning areas up to 15 feet across. The heat distribution suggested either multiple animals clustered together or a single organism with a body structure fundamentally different from typical mammals. The signatures appeared most frequently during night hours and showed movement patterns inconsistent with known nocturnal species. Standard nocturnal predators like leopards show heat signatures that move steadily along ground level, following game trails. These signatures moved through canopy levels at heights between 20 and 60 feet above ground, sometimes remaining stationary for hours before shifting position rapidly. Initial analysis suggested the signatures might be bird colonies or primate groups sleeping in trees, but the heat intensity was wrong. Birds and primates show relatively low heat signatures due to their small size and high surface area to volume ratio. These signatures showed heat intensity levels comparable to animals weighing 80 pounds or more. Conservation groups shared the data with zoologists who proposed several explanations. Some suggested previously undocumented gorilla subspecies. Others proposed the signatures represented multiple smaller animals grouped together. The most controversial explanation came from a primatologist who had worked in the region for 20 years. He suggested the signatures matched descriptions of the Jaba fofi from tribal accounts and might represent the first indirect scientific evidence that the creature actually exists.
Still curious? Then don't stop now. The next mystery is already waiting for you. Just click the video on screen. I saved it just for you. See you there, curious one.